Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Nice to see you after so long.
Nice to see you. I'm very happy to join. Thank you. Thank you.
Hiba, we have a couple of new faces that you maybe haven't seen. So Ambika is joining us from, she's joining us from Nigeria, and Vibu is here
Zambia.
in Toronto. Sorry, Zambia. Sorry, Zambia.
Oh, okay. Hello, Ronnie. Hi.
And Vibu is in Toronto, and then Stacy's here.
Hi, Vibu.
Gabrielle, how are you?
I'm good, thank you. Thank you
Thanks.
for asking. I'm happy to be here in the group.
Good. So we usually have a few more, but I think they'll probably either be coming or maybe not. So I know Paul, it was his birthday yesterday, and he texted me saying he was with his family, he was at the Elton John concert in Toronto. So he may have had a late night. All right, let us launch in. So we will always, we start each session by giving thanks, and it gives us an opportunity to maximize our potential. So we'll just go ahead and start. Om Gyantimirandasya Gyananjana Shalakaya Chaksur Unmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Guruve Namaha Mukam Karoti Vachalam Pangu Langete Kirim Yatkripatam Aham Vande Shri Guru Dinataranam Vanchakalpatrubhyascha Kripa Sunda Evacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. So thank you again for joining us. We give thanks to all our teachers, and we show our respects to all of you. So thank you again for being vehicles of compassion and for coming together to learn together and to share all this knowledge with each other and hopefully with others. So as we always will start with our culture, bringing full presence to the session, a respect for all individuals that have come, and the determination to do the work that is being asked of us. And I always like to remind ourselves about the two things we should always try to remember is the good others have done for us, to stay in that space of gratitude, and also remember the maybe not so good or the bad we have done to others, to always keep us in the space of wanting to improve. And then the two things we should always try to let go of as best possible, but the bad others have done for us, at least the emotions that are attached to it, not maybe necessarily the action, and the good we have done for others, again, so we do not come to a space of becoming prideful and always, again, wanting to be better. So again, thank you so much for being with us. This is, again, always one of the highlights of my week. And I just wanted to start by seeing how everyone is doing, and if everyone had a chance to read the section that we have in front of us today, which is pretty much starting off from last week, starting from the section called The Leader's First Conquest. Any initial thoughts or anything that stood out to anyone that people wanted to bring forward? Avantika, how are you? Good to see you. And I think Ronnie is also joining. So Avantika, we have Hiba joining us after a little while. So it's nice to have her back. And then Hiba, we also have Ambika and her husband Ronnie. They're both in Zambia, so they're both onto. Ronnie, good to see you again.
Good to see you all. Good to be with you guys.
So we were just starting with, so we have this next section here, which is really about the leader and the actions of a leader. And we just wanted to see if there was any initial reflections, but otherwise we can go in into looking into a couple of these sections. Did anyone have any opening thoughts or comments that they wanted to share?
So Rick and I had it struck me, the passage talking about how, all these great reflections, right, that you hear, that you read about, they take place in times of so much struggle, or in incredible times like on the battlefield, or the example of, being in the last days of life, right, shot by an arrow. And it's just, it strikes me how we don't necessarily like going through struggle, right? It's not pleasant, maybe, but at the same time, just how necessary it is. I like how it talks about here, it's my page 11, it says impending death can focus the consciousness on the essential. I think that's a key point, because we tend to get so priorities can shift and there's so much going on, but when you really focus on what's the one thing, or what's the most important thing, that's where you really get to that deep truth, where you have that meaning, right, that can endure, like we see in the Gita, it's endured for thousands of years, and that could only have happened, right, in that focused time that came from the struggle.
Yeah, thank you. I'm thinking of this. Have you heard of this principle called the law of forced efficiency?
Ooh, no, but I like it.
It means that, when we have more time to do something, we'll take that much time. But as soon as we shorten the amount of time we have for something, we will take that much time to do it, right? And death is really, this whole knowledge, it's spoken. So although Bhishma Dev, he's speaking the information on this battlefield, the larger context is it's spoken. I think people have seen references to this Srimad Bhagavatam book, and the person who is being recounted the instructions of Bhishma Dev, he has 7 days to live, and so he has to decide what he wants to do with his last 7 days. And so again, that principle of just trying to maximize the limited time that we have, I'm always trying to remind myself of this law of forced efficiency, and so what you're saying is just reminding me of this. It's amazing that such incredible pieces of, knowledge, but also the growth we endure comes in those times of struggle. And I think, the human mind, it's very, the yogic texts call it like chanchala, it's flickering, which means it can get easily distracted and move from one thing to the other. But as they say, keeping the main thing is really why we're here every week. And it's really, again, this constant reminders to keep us always focused on what's essential. So yeah, thank you for bringing up this point, because this line that you just read really speaks to the importance of the time is limited. There's a famous story people have seen, and I've introduced this character Yudhishthira. He's the oldest of the 5 Pandavas, the brothers. And there's a time where he's being asked questions by the celestial gods, because his brothers have all, they drank water, they passed, and they've all weren't supposed to consume the water, but they all died. And so Yudhishthira has to go through a set of questions to help his brothers come back to life. And one of the questions that he asks is, what is the most amazing thing? And Yudhishthira says, the most amazing thing is that people are dying every day, but everyone else thinks it's never going to happen to them. And that's his answer to the most amazing thing, in creation. So that's something that that answer has always stuck with me, because it's again, something that just really is trying to focus on the limited time that we have, but sometimes forget about. Ambika, please.
Hi, everyone. Actually, I'm going to remove my AirPods So you guys have optimal audio. So I haven't read the full text. I've read parts of it, and Ronnie and I just had a really lengthy conversation prior to this session around just values and how we show up in our fears, etc. And just I think the two things that really stand out for me in the first 2 pages itself is how in the Manu Samhita, the greatest conquest a king can make is a conquest of his own senses, and minus regulating our own senses, we cannot be strong leaders, or no one can be a strong leader. And then the role that acharyas play is essentially to guide us along this path, and in the presence of acharyas, how that growth is accelerated. And ultimately, everybody is expected to be a leader in various ways, which is brilliant, right? Because there's such a belief system that some have what it takes and others don't. But if we go by this, then if you're all leaders in various ways and expect all to become spiritual teachers of, or maybe it's from a particular class itself, but just I think, how can we all be responsible to really own those internal systems within ourselves to be our most optimal at an individual level, therefore to impact others in a way where we're even out of inaction or ignorance at times, we could contribute towards destructive habits within a society, right? Like our own judgment, and I'm really present to how at times our judgment, my judgment of certain behavioral types or lack thereof could have me step away from certain conversations when I know I could add value, but because the judgment's there and certain things may seem immoral or wrong or bad, there's no leadership or access to leadership in there. And it's just, it's interesting to see just regulation of senses or lack thereof in those moments is allowing a status quo to prevail.
Yeah, thank you, Ambika. I really wanted to really bring up this point that you were mentioning about controlling the senses. And if you remember, I'm going to go back to a slide that I thought would be relevant from, if you remember, from the Book of Dharma. So Ambika, and for the others who haven't joined, we previously had done this book called the Book of Dharma. And one of the things that's really interesting about the senses is that they're entry points to what we experience in life. And so many of the things that, controlling the senses, it is what we simply think it is. And when we want to look at how the trajectory of our life is going, it's really easy just to come back to the things we see every day, the things we're putting, that go between our ears, what we're tasting, what we're touching, what we're smelling, what we're talking about. And again, just bringing it back to be really, really simple. But, no one can be a strong leader without regulating the senses. That's the leader's first conquest. And so this discussion about controlling the senses, if we see here, there's 4 pillars of Dharma. And the aspect that has to do with controlling the senses, it has to do with purity, right? If I'll just go back and show the original for those that haven't, just as a reminder for all of us, but this is really here the essence of Dharma. It's divided into these 4 kind of domains, but purity really has to do with the domain of discriminating and differentiating. And so when the greater we have control over our senses, this in fact frees us to be able to discriminate at a higher level because the senses are under more control. And so I'm just bringing this up because it's very much tied to this point about where do we start by, controlling our senses. And it really, because it's through our senses, then in the Bhagavad Gita describes these modes of nature, goodness, passion, and ignorance, they come in. But again, they very much start with what we are seeing, what we're touching, what we're smelling, what we're tasting, what we're listening to. And so I just wanted to make that connection as a very kind of starting point for us to reflect on that first conquest for all of us is controlling our senses. This is really reason why in the deeper practice of yoga, there is this aspect of following lifestyle principles. It's there to really help us with this conquest of our senses. And I think we can all say that it's not always easy, right? In the Bhagavad Gita, it describes these senses as wild horses, and that it really requires a really very expert chariot driver to keep the reins very tight, for these horses. Otherwise they go all over the place, right? And we know that just because we monitor our minds on a day-to-day basis. And so just coming back again to better being in control of our senses, if we can just look at, just step back and see what are we putting in, it very much can help us also determine what the output is as well. Did anyone else want anything to share on this comment here about controlling senses? It's a really powerful one for the first point.
Yeah, I just had something to contribute there.
Please.
And one of the observations that I had was that it's like, there is no right or wrong, but depending on the outcome that one is looking at, one has to tweak. I'm going back to the gunas. So if one is truly on, because there's different types of leadership, right? So there's personal leadership, where one is on a transformative path, their spiritual awakening, and one is, maybe renunciating some things. And that is where the sattva gunas are so important. A lot of fasting, a lot of tapas, a lot of meditation, a lot of, even kind of withdrawal from the senses, parigraha, right? That's what it is. But a beautiful thing that this book is reminding us that there is, certain other roles as a leader, which could be less about personal transformation and more about administrating good governance to a unit, a community, or society, or a project or an endeavor. And over there needs to be a good balance of sattva as well as rajas yoga. So I think that, this is really, in my mind, clearing the confusion I've had previously, because obviously, I entered the corporate world, became a leader in my own right, when I was unawakened to all of this knowledge. And at that time, when the awakening happened, it became more a personal transformation thing. So there was a withdrawal of all of that and this thing. But now that I'm an entrepreneur again, and I'm going back, this is helping me understand that the way the gunas are described and prescribed, it is not necessary that you must stay away from the rajas gunas all the time. As a medicinal purpose, a certain percentage of that infused into your protocol is good. And I don't know if that's relevant to what we're discussing right now, but to me, that link has, that's the light bulb that went on, is that, there was this whole thing of, being on the hamster wheel with the prescribed models of success and leadership, then going through this phase of absolute transformation, personal leadership, and sattva, and, increasing the light quotient in oneself, where almost everything rajas was diminished. And then one was wondering why I feel great and happy, but a lot of the, a lot of the things that came so effortlessly in leadership earlier, I'm struggling with that. Till one started making, bringing back certain of the rajas in a controlled manner. So one is not all rajas, one is mostly sattva, but is incorporating the thing. A lot of this thing about, the leader must be strong, must be compassionate, but strong. To me, that whole passage is all about, Chanakya Niti, and about having that element of kingship or rajas as a tool or a weapon that you play with situationally. And the discretion, the discrimination, the ability to know the difference of when to use that tool is I think, one of the founding pillars of leadership. as this book is revealing to us.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you, Avantika. I'm reminded just of when you bring this up that there's a time and a place for these different modes. I think when we were discussing in Yoga in the Dark Night of the Soul, that when we start something or we're creating something, that takes rajas, right? And even rest and recovery, for our bodies is done in tamas, right? So that there is and like you said, this aspect of when to be strong as a leader, which may mean invoking some degree of passion. Otherwise, people won't, there won't be a certain amount of respect for the leader, that has to be there. But again, that discrimination of when it should be used and when it should be held, right? Is really always the greatest challenge. But you bring up a great point about that there's a role for these different energies at different times. Thank you. Stacy had a question.
And I love what you both said, because what was striking me initially when it said control the emotions, what we focus on amplifies, right? And so I had been doing some reading about habits, and it's like the problem with trying to say, oh, I'm not going to do this, is you're focusing all your energy on like wishing that you had what you don't have, right? Trying to cut out chocolate or something, right? And so it's kind of that. I think what you both talked about is about a degree of acceptance and balance, integration, maybe of seeing that there are all these different emotions. They don't have to control you, but you can choose when to let them in or out, whatever the case may be, but not to necessarily have them control you.
Yeah, no, it's a really great point about, and it really speaks to the section we were going to read, that I wanted us to all take a look at. But this in this section we're going to read, the king's duty is spiritual. It says when one is not attached to anything, but at the same time accepts everything in relation to God, one is rightly situated about possessiveness. So it means that we accept everything as something that we are a caretaker of, but yet we properly know its relation and how to, the main point that you're bringing out, Aether, is that aspect of attachment, right? That we can have many things, but are we, if we're not attached to it, then it can be used for service rather than used as something that controls us. So, Gabrielle, please.
The wrong one. Yeah, I just want to mention that me personally, I don't like the word control, because to control under emotions is, for me personally, it sounds like to suppress them. And I think all emotions have a signal. They want to mention something. So I don't want to control my emotions. I want to understand my emotions. And by understanding my emotions, I can find my, so-called weaknesses, the points where either other people controlling or circumstances are controlling me, or at the reverse point to detect myself if I am trying to controlling things. So to me, emotions are essential things. They keep me alive because they give me, with the senses are helping me to detect emotions, and the emotions give me a viewpoint for my, let's say, for my spiritual core, where I'm standing. So I used emotions as a tool that I'm able to ask myself where I am now, to understand myself better. And when I understand myself better, I understand the situation better and the whole thing. Yeah.
Mm.
So
Yeah.
I just want to mention that the control thing is, I'm very, very curious about the words I am using or other people are using. And I like the way my children called it. My children always said they're the word police. So be very aware of which words you're using. And I like very a lot when they did this little children's game with me. And I often remember when I'm in need emotional, I remember how my children behave when they are in emotional need, or how I do behave when I am in, how I behaved when I was a child in emotional need, because to me, it looks like that this was what Jesus meant when he said, be like the children, because they're innocent and they withdraw, they become more silent, and yeah, I prefer to learn from nature and children. Adults have, to me, it looks like to me, adults have more weaknesses and more obstacles to overcome. So yeah, I just want to mention that the word control, I would be a bit aware of that.
Yeah, thank you, Gabrielle. I was just thinking this, sometimes this word control can infer perhaps, or what was coming to me is suppression or suppress. And I think you bring up a great point that there are definitely signals for how we're feeling. And I think feeling our emotions is very important, because suppression, or, it's almost like if you push them down, like a springboard, it'll come back up that much more. So understanding is a great way to look at emotions rather than controlling. I was hoping we could start a little bit of reading at the top of page 39, but the section is "The King's Duty is Spiritual." If someone wants to read, that would be fantastic.
I can, Ricken.
Please.
The king's duty is spiritual. A king's highest duty is to the gods. Next, and of equal importance, is his duty to truth. Truth is the highest refuge. All the world rests on truth. A king must consistently remind himself that he is ultimately answerable to God. Therefore, he should not be distracted by the idea that he can please each of his citizens, which of course is impractical. Being a leader is not about winning a popularity contest. Sometimes leaders are coerced into giving favors or supporting particular interests due to sentimentality or a false sense of indebtedness. But if leaders consider themselves accountable to God, they will not be easily influenced away from principles of morality. Bhishma Deva explains elsewhere that a king's highest duty is to Krishna, the absolute truth. God and truth go hand in hand. When the relative truths of the material world are favorable to our service to Krishna, we can align ourselves with them. But we should understand that these relative principles and truths are always subordinate to the Supreme Lord. Material truths are always relative, and this often causes ambiguity. For example, Bhishma Deva says that kings should know how to conceal their plans, that they should know how to be diplomatic. At the same time, he states that a king must place great emphasis on the pursuit of truth. Although these two statements appear contradictory, we should understand that Bhishma Deva is instructing Yudhishthira on how to manage the material world with the intention of bringing about the highest good. This is analogous to managing a prison. The material world is essentially a prison for conditioned souls. It is filled with living entities with criminal mentalities who use and abuse what God has provided without giving him credit or accepting that they are accountable to him. The king's main concern is to rehabilitate the prisoners. Managing the material energy is really about helping criminals become free. Rehabilitation can be enacted by a variety of methods. Would you like me to go on?
Please.
If everyone were already free, of course, management would be different. Bhishma Deva was not speaking of a pure devotee managing other pure devotees, but of how a divinely inspired king could deal with people suffering from varying degrees of sinful mentality. Our own application of management principles centers around the great spiritualist and scholar of religion, Rupa Goswami, who said, Nirbandha Krishna Sambandhe Yukta Vairagam Uchyate. When one is not attached to anything, but at the same time accepts everything in relation to Krishna, God, one is rightly situated above possessiveness. On the other hand, one who rejects everything without knowledge of its relationship to Krishna is not as complete in his renunciation. This means that in applying leadership principles or in choosing which principle to follow in our own lives, we should accept those that are favorable to our service to God and reject all those that are unfavorable. This is the basis of discrimination. But how can we discriminate between favorable and unfavorable? We see that great spiritual teachers throughout history always support tradition, while at the same time bringing about needed changes or adaptations in the details of how a spiritual culture is followed. These changes are made according to time, place, and the persons involved. While this may work when employed by spiritually evolved beings, how can the average person know when he or she is adapting in an appropriate way or according to conditioning? In other words, how can we know how to not disturb the essence while changing details according to time and place? When one of my mentors, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada, was asked this question, he said, "It's not an easy thing to know. It takes a certain amount of spiritual advancement to know what can be changed and what cannot. It becomes important to understand what constitutes elevated consciousness and thus what constitutes a proper leader. If we learn to recognize true visionary leadership, we can trust in the changes that are being made." Srila Prabhupada made many changes for the modern day Vaishnava community. For example, he reduced the number of rounds from 64 to 16. That is, the number of times one chants a full round of prayers on one's rosary beads. He gave Brahmical initiation to women, a departure from Indian tradition. He gave sannyasa, the prestigious renounced order of life, to young Western men, whereas traditionally one had to be in the last stages of one's life. Many of these adjustments were made out of his desire to serve his guru's intention to preach God consciousness in the Western countries. He was compassionate enough to see what was needed by these Westerners who did not share the same cultural experiences as the Indian monks. Similarly, Ramanujacharya Ramanujacharya, a great teacher from medieval India, made changes by codifying deity worship. And Madhvacharya, another prominent Vaishnava leader, made changes in the lineage's emphasis on dualism. But not just any saintly person can make such fundamental changes with the same positive effect. Again, it is important to know how to evaluate leadership. Otherwise, we may wonder whether the concessions being made for time and place are merely a reflection of a leader's inability to follow a path that might be more stringent. Bhishma Deva's instructions help us to understand that powerful leaders do powerful things, make powerful changes, lead in powerful ways, and have a powerful vision with penetrating focus. Their intense power, in fact, always creates an atmosphere of danger. Because of this, some say democracy may be a safer choice, as if there is more safety in many people coming together to make a mistake than one or a few leaders making a mistake on everyone's behalf. It should be noted, however, that in a proper Vedic system, the king does not make his decision unilaterally. A Vedic king is not a dictator. Rather, he is a leader who takes counsel from Brahmanas, saintly priests, and the precedents set by earlier divinely inspired monarchs. Again, the spiritual leader's first commitment is to God. We should keep this in mind as we move on to other points.
Thank you. I know I mentioned this in a previous session, but if those who watch The Crown, I think it's an opportune moment to commemorate the queen who has passed away. And she, rightfully says in that documentary that when there's a lot of conflict, she said that her ultimate duty is to God. And so I was really appreciating that point that was made in that series. Just want to introduce or welcome Ed. Thank you
Great to
for
see you.
being with us. Any reflections or comments on this section? To me, it really has to, when we're talking about keeping the main thing, it really brings it to focus. And I think also brings about many times we, see in modern society that people are trying to adapt things to make it more relevant for the generation that is as current. And I think it just keeps us mindful of the priority amongst, the challenges that come up when we're trying to keep the essence of what we're trying to share with others. So that was something that to me was really relevant about this section in our application to what we're all dealing with as leaders.
Any other comments on that? If not,
I just want to add, Ed, very quickly, if I may, that Ronnie and I were just having such a lengthy conversation on this very point around so much of what we live in today's day and age is conditioning, and there's symptoms of the unworkability everywhere around us, where relationships fall apart. In many instances, lifestyle diseases are on a rise, right? So there's symptoms everywhere that certain structures aren't working. And so what is that departure? At what point we pivot? And this point around when to know to pivot and make those fundamental changes that will have a positive effect, and to have the right consciousness in place so that you're not just avoiding testing times, is, gosh, such a necessary yet important deviation. And to know when to do that and how to bring that about, I think the guidance of acharyas and gurus who are totally aligned to the core is essential, or we just deflect and deviate into other realms and it's more of the same.
Such a powerful point that you're sharing. And I mean, it's something I often think about. I was listening to, it was one CEO of one company, a very multinational organization, and they were speaking recently. I was actually in Bournemouth a few days ago. And so we were speaking, and this individual was sharing something. And they made a very good point, which is similar to the point that you made. They said that what happens is you can minimize the likelihood of errors if you're open and honest in conversation with the right people, which I thought was a very good point, because we're going to make decisions. Throughout our lives, we make decisions. But if there's humility is a very interesting term. It's the ability to know what we know and to know what we don't know. Humility is also the ability to consider maybe someone else has an insight that I don't have. Maybe they have a perspective that I don't have. And humility is ultimately about being ready to honor the truth. You know, I was just thinking, what's the difference between a mature person and an immature person? The main difference is an immature person, they want reality to be what they think it should be. Whereas a mature person acts according to the reality, you know? They're a truth teller. They want to know what's the truth. You know, like sometimes people are in denial. So something's going on and they're just closing. I have someone that I know, they had some illness. And what happened, they have someone I know had some illness, and it's now come to a certain point that they have to do more work on it. But that illness was an issue which was there for many years, and the people around them just closed their eyes. And you see, we can all relate to this. I know I've done this before, but behind it is this idea that if I close my eyes and stick my head in the sand, it's suddenly going to go away by itself. But that doesn't happen. You know, so one of the things Ricken and I were talking about recently is the ability to face facts early. And I've seen it's a critical leadership skill. When people have that, you catch an issue when it's so small that a tiny amount of time, energy, and effort can completely reroute the issue in a positive direction. But to your point, Ambika, you know, it's always wonderful hearing you because you're always a deep thinker. Many people, when we stick our head in the sand, all that happens is the issue becomes protracted. It becomes a much bigger, much deeper issue. And then something that could have been dealt with in 5 minutes is now going to take 5 hours, 5 days, or 5 months, 5 weeks, 5 years, etc. It's going to take a lot longer. So, you know, I often challenge leaders, what are you not seeing? Right? And there's two sides to that. What are you not seeing internally? What are you not seeing externally? Right? Because we often catch, I mean, just a show of hands, how many of you have seen something blip on the radar? So it's something really small, but it's just, you've just caught something, a shift in behavior of someone in your team, or a shift in the market, and you know, this is significant. This is going to go in a certain direction unless we act. Who's been in that space before? Okay, I can see Ronnie's hand. I can see Avantika. I think we've all been there, right? It's just so incredible. That's why I always like being part of this group and this discussion, because honestly, when we come together like this, we can catch things early and we can move mountains, right? You can move an oak tree while it's still a seed. You see? Think about that. When the tree's fully formed, it's a huge operation, but you catch it when it's very small. You can make some significant shift that's going to literally change the course of our destiny. And I know, Ricken, I know you were all reading. So this section, when I was thinking about what we were preparing, there's so many things in here. Just one particular point. I mean, there's so many things we're going to discuss, but I'll just share this particular point. So this is on page 38, and I think you read this. So it's just reiterating. Leaders do not wait for things to happen. Rather, they make things happen. There's a very powerful statement by a very great political advisor, and I know some of you are familiar with this person, Chanakya. He says 3 words: fate follows action. It's a sutra. It's a short statement that's full of deep wisdom. Fate follows action, you know, meaning that the mentality of a leader, as B.T. Swami says in that particular book, is a leader is creating the environment. Of course, let's be very clear, we're not God, so we don't create the environment completely. So it's a balance of 2 factors. Last week we did the SWOT analysis. What is a SWOT analysis? The SWOT analysis is being fully aware of the environment. What's going on? What are the strengths in the environment? What are the weaknesses in the environment? What are the opportunities in the environment? What are the threats in the environment? So one dynamic is to be alert, to be conscious. And I tell you honestly, to be very honest with you, as a leader, if you're highly conscious, it puts you into the top 0.0001% of leaders on the entire planet. because most people you'll see are not fully aware of what's going on. They're not aware of what's going on in the environment, and they're not aware of what's going on within them. We're going to look at that in a bit more detail today. So the first dimension is what's going on in the environment, and the second dimension is what's going on within me. Okay, what are my strengths, abilities to impose upon the environment in a loving way? So what do I know about myself that can make something good happen? What do I know about my team that can make something positive happen? So having the environmental awareness and having the self-awareness and bringing both of those to bear to make something positive happen is an incredible skill. So 3 key elements: but environmental awareness, self-awareness, and action on the basis of that awareness. Some people act, but they don't have good understanding. So that means you're going to fail, right? Some people have good understanding, but they don't act. That means nothing's going to change. The formula, the golden formula, is to have all 3 elements. Okay. Now, are you okay for me to continue from this point, Rikin?
Yes, you can. Go ahead.
Okay. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to share my screen. Actually, I'm going to move my slides back before I share my screen. There's a few things we want to cover, but we want to go back to the beginning first. Okay, good. So I'm going to share my screen now. Okay, so we're going to continue on. So Leadership for an Age of Higher Consciousness, Part 2. We're looking at various elements of how we can be more effective as Ronnie, do you have something you want to say before we start to share the slides?
I was just, thank you for picking. I raised my hand earlier just to share, and because I'm going to head off for my meeting soon, so just putting a message that I wanted to share. But yeah, like because I didn't get to read this before, but I think we had a discussion on this topic that was exactly for this reading, literally for this reading. And Ambi's being a bit tactful and diplomatic in her sharing what we did be discussing, and I'm just going to be straight. Is first of all, we're reading this as leader, which is as leader. Why are we all reading this book like in the first place? Are we reading it to become better leaders in how we lead and serve and support people? Or is it just about how we conduct our own life? And Ambika and I specifically in the coaching space from time to time have scenarios come up where people want coaching on certain something. I'm more so on leadership, adventure and health, and Ambika on relationships, but it's also about your personal leadership. And for a number of days, there's been something bubbling up for her, which is she's calling me and saying, how do you coach somebody that's reaching out to you, help for coaching, but you completely disagree with how out of integrity or unmoral they are, right? And I just said, well, you've already failed them. Then you can't make a difference if we've judged them, because you're pegging how they should perform their life against a set rule or standards or morality, which are, in my view, somewhat man-made rules. And when we look at the monarchy, they talk about their rules and values that you govern and guide a society. And from time to time, they change. You know, historically, someone of color walking into a particular region or location was breaking the law, right? Somebody who had a particular sexual orientation was illegal. Today, it's legal, right? That changes over time. And similarly, she's dealing with this scenario, just being straight, is somebody that we're working with, also friends of ours, that are good, like family of ours, is sharing a situation they're dealing with, which is they want coaching on relationship. They are in a state of emotional turmoil, depression, but they start off by raising the hand and acknowledging that they've not been faithful in the relationship. And who they've not been faithful with, or who this person's been involved with, is, for lack of a better word, and growing up in Zambia or Africa, and sort of grown up in that region, knows there are certain people there that operate kind of above the law, like a lot of gangs and gangsters and groups like that, and is involved with somebody who can be very physically life-threatening and dangerous. And so is this person's husband, right? And so they are in a scenario where they're both threatening each other with guns or taking another's life or something of that sort. And Nambi's reaching out to me, and normally we only reach out, consult with each other if it's something where we can make a difference. Otherwise, there's a non-gossip policy between us. And she's worried or concerned about this person, about herself. And I what I'm getting from this reading is really how, if you stand on this is the rule book and you've reached the law, then you're going to make, well, everybody's wrong in this scenario, and you really can't help the greater good, right? You can't really serve this person because we've judged them for breaching certain morals. We've judged them for already being wrong in the first place. And I guess what's there for me is, how can we support somebody, coach somebody, where we can stand in non-judgmental of them, not demoralizing them, not making their actions wrong, but having them get that what they're dealing with, the emotional internal turmoil, is some form of, it's an internal war. It's an internal Kurukshetra going on for them. How could I do this? And now how do I get out of it? And it's causing me depression. Is how can we remove our leaning on certain morally acceptable standards, be non-judgmental, and invite them to bring this compassion, bring this self-forgiveness, right? And so this is the kind of battle as a leader or a coach, you're trying to advise somebody, how do we, in this moment, what's key, what's pertinent is to empower this person to practice self-forgiveness and compassion so she can first get out of her own prison that she's put herself in.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
Yeah, that's just what I wanted to share or add. And the question is, as we're learning from the kings and the royals, sometimes they pardon or act that deviates from what the law of the land might be.
Mm-hmm. So this is a very good it's a very good question that you're bringing up. There's a few things that Bhakti Tirtha Maharaj talks about when it comes to leadership in this. The first is that, see, I want to reframe this about right and wrong. There are those things which are favorable to human development, human healthy relationships and outcomes, and there are those things which are unfavorable. For example, if I said to anyone here, would you be happy, would you feel it's good for your partner to be unloyal to you? You wouldn't say yes. Now, of course, these things definitely do happen. So there are certain things which are inherently more favorable to certain outcomes and to the human flourishing. So when we talk about not man-made laws, because there is truth that there can be some deviation between those and deeper principles. But when we're speaking about what they call dharma, the deep principles, then it's the idea that what goes around comes around. Okay, so every action has an equal and opposite reaction. So some things are considered healthy because they create long-term healthy responses. And some things are considered unhealthy because in the long term, they create unhealthy or unwanted responses. So in that sense, we don't even have to talk about it in terms of being judgmental. We don't even have to talk about it in terms of being man-made or not man-made. What we're really looking at is what are actually the principles which are favorable for the long-term human flourishing? What are the principles which are favorable for the long-term development of healthy relationships? So from that angle, we would say, obviously, it's not good to have an affair, right? Because it's going to break, and as this person is now experiencing. Very interesting point. What they find in the Vedic literatures is that when we go against ideas and approaches which we feel deep down are healthy, the reactions aren't necessarily just external, right? So for example, it's not just, okay, my wife found out and now they don't want to be with me. But as you're expressing, the reactions are also internal. You see, we all know this. We all know this intuitively. We all have had times where we did something which we knew in our heart, it went against our conscience. Isn't it true? Right? So sometimes, you felt, you know what, I shouldn't have shouted at that person. They didn't really deserve that, that kind of snappy reaction, or I shouldn't have taken that, whatever it is. So it's actually more from the point of view that when we do things which don't align to deeper, let's say deeper dharmic or natural laws, they actually have a weakening effect upon us. I'll give you an example. This is very interesting. The research has shown that when you lie, when someone tells lies, it actually messes up your internal system. This is really interesting. And I can give you the references. I'll find the references and I'll share it on the Titans group if you want the research. So what happens when people tell lies is that they also damage their ability to evaluate the reality effectively and accurately. So what happens is when we're lying to other people, we're actually lying to ourselves, even though we know it's a lie. So I'm saying something I know is untrue. I think I'm just fooling the other person. Wrong. You're actually damaging your own internal system of what they call sense making. Okay, so then what happens is, consequently, such a person, when they try to evaluate reality, which we all do, in order to make decisions in our own lives, our apparatus of evaluating reality has now become weakened because we told lies to other people. So what I'm trying to get at is, what we do to others is also what we're doing to ourselves. There is no distinction on a deeper level, although superficially I think, oh, I did this to them and not to me. No, there's repercussions on my own mentality. There's repercussions on my own consciousness. So to your point, just to clarify, I would say it's not so much about being judgmental, because that word has a negative connotation, but there's no situation in life where we're not making some evaluation. So we're always making evaluations. That's the first point. Second, the evaluation should be based upon what is best for the human natural flourishing and development. So it's a deeper set of principles, but principles like that do exist independently of us. For example, someone can say, I'm not gonna eat. Yes, you can say you're not gonna eat, but your body, independently of what an individual thinks, it will only perform and function properly if it has the right fuel. So there's laws of the body that allow the body to function properly. There's laws of the mind and emotions, which allows the mind and emotions to function properly as well. And so Dharma is really about honoring those laws. Right? Just like we said about the example of lying. If I lie, what I'm doing is I'm actually damaging my own ability to make sense of my own reality. And it will then mean I'll make worse decisions, whether decisions about my own life, decisions about my business, decisions about my relationships. So I will pay a price for going against that principle. That's how we would actually think about it. Now, the last thing to share to your particular scenario that you were sharing, Ronnie, is we never stop being compassionate though. Okay, so whatever we've all made mistakes. If we say, all right, I'm not going to help people who made mistakes, I'd be out of the equation, to be very honest, right? So the point isn't so much where we are. The point is, how do we lovingly advise people to get them to move in a direction which is healthier than the position that they are in at the moment? And that can involve atonement. That can involve putting our hand up and saying, you know what, I made a mistake. I did this, it was wrong. I shouldn't have done that. And it was wrong because by doing this, I've also hurt another individual unnecessarily, right? So it involves a certain level of honesty. And then on that basis, seeing where can we go from that particular point onwards. Yep. So it's not about rejecting people. And at the same time, it's not about denying that there are standards to healthy human development that we should honor, because if we don't honor them, then actually what will happen is at some point in our lives, those standards will not be honored in relation to us, right? Someone has stolen from another person, and I don't want to judge. It's okay, right? That's fine. But in future, don't complain when someone steals from you, right? So it's recognizing that there are universals, and we know that. We know, I think they call it the golden rule. Do unto others as we would have them do unto us. So there are some fundamental dynamics of human existence which are favorable or unfavorable, and we want to recognize those as well. Does that answer your question, Ronnie? I think it's a great point. Yeah. Forgive me, I'm going to jump into the presentation because I'm also conscious of the time that we have left, and there's quite a few things we want to share. Is that okay?
Yeah, thanks, Ed. I will have to leave soon for my other call,
No
but
problem.
thanks for that info.
No problem at all. Okay, so let's dive straight into this. Okay, so you can see my screen. So Leadership for a Nature of Higher Consciousness Part 2. We're looking at the Leadership 2 book. And this section is discussing a leader's first conquest. So it's really about self-mastery, okay? It's really about how we as leaders develop that, why it's so important. And I feel, I'll be honest, I'm very passionate about this topic for a number of reasons. So let's just get into the conversation. The first point to understand is my weakness is my work. Let me ask you this question. How many of you have ever had to either work for or be around a leader who had some serious negative leadership traits? Who's ever seen that happen? Okay, Ambika, I can see quite a few. Okay, I can see quite a few hands. What does it feel like to have to work for that kind of person?
Scary and discouraging.
Why? Why, Ambika? Why is it discouraging?
Because it kept reinforcing for me my existing narrative of myself, which is I am not good enough and I'm a nobody. And every criticism I got from them made that reality louder and louder.
Wow, that's a very powerful sharing. And again, this is the space where we can have those kinds of conversations. Okay, Ronnie, tell me about this loss of respect of them.
I think because we're judging, we are assessing and analyzing this person, and we have an expectation or ideal that we expect them to operate to or with. And when they are not demonstrating that, we subconsciously write them off. We're like, well, they just don't have a long-term game in this arena.
Okay, so there'll be definitely some judgment about the individual. There can also be, to Ambika's point, some judgment about ourselves. A question linked to this. How does the fact that they're in a position of power play into what they say? In other words, someone can criticize us and they're not our leader. And then the same person can criticize us and they're in charge of us. They're in a leadership position. How does that position affect what they say and do? Sorry, let me ask this again. How does their position affect the impact of what they say and do to other people?
Well, they're setting an example, or they're expected to.
Okay, so they're expected to set an example. Okay, but so what?
So now they're misleading. So now they are confusing the masses.
Okay, so they're confusing people because they're doing something wrong and they've got power. What else? They're in a position of power. How does that affect the impact? I can see Gabrielle, you've got your hand raised.
Yeah, I think if they're in position of power, it comes up a revolution that people don't want such a leader. So they have to show up that they are not following the action of this leader.
Interesting. Thank you very much for that point. So when the leader has negative impacts upon the masses, at a certain point, the masses may say, you know what, we're not going to follow anymore. We're going to move in a different direction. So it can trigger revolution when the leader does not lead properly. Interesting. Anything else?
I want to add,
Please.
I think this is what we see on world politics now.
Yeah, very true. Very, very true. And we see this a lot, unfortunately.
And I'm sure we will see this even more in the next years, because all people have to take back their own power of their own mind, because they cannot follow. It's impossible. We cannot.
Wonderful point. So when people don't trust the leader, we actually have rebellion. And that's a very, very interesting point. And I know in the section that you read, it was also made very clear by B.T. Swami that the leader has to actually protect people. And if the leader doesn't protect, then the leader ends up exploiting and manipulating instead. Thank you for that. Christina.
I mean, another part, most like you are getting disengaged. So you are just, you don't do a huge revolution, but actually you don't have like a silently not following already. And it's also what it does to personality, that you kind of also fail in a trail. That I mean, when you take a decision to act like this in one another reason, like that it makes something with you as well, like
Absolutely. And this is why we're going to talk about this now. This is the idea that as leaders, whatever we do is amplified by the number of people we're leading, the power that we have, the influence. So we need to also have some tools to work on ourselves and know ourselves. So it's like this. We are as strong as our weakest link. One of the things that Bhakti-tirtha Swami speaks about in this section of the book is how if the leader isn't careful about their weaknesses, that is where they will sell themselves out and minimize their ability to do good for other people. And so to your point, Gabrielle, we see that when leaders are greedy, they can cheat the people that they're leading. When we see that leaders are, let's say, lusty, they can be disloyal to the people that they're leading. Whatever weakness a leader has, it can cause them to damage, control, manipulate, and exploit the people they're meant to be protecting because they've not done the work on themselves. And that's our key theme for today, by the way. It's how we do the work on ourselves. And we're going to share with you some very interesting research in relation to this. I'm going to bring the slide back up because there's a few more things we want to share, then we'll go to an activity. So let's move on from here. So if we want to do this, a leader has to have healthy self-esteem. If a leader has low self-esteem, it's a problem. If a leader is arrogant, proud, has excessive self-esteem, it's also a problem. Let's pause and look at this. And I can see Avantika's nodding, so I think you can definitely share some stories with us on what you've seen and your insights in this. So let's start with the excessive self-esteem. A leader who thinks that they're better than the people that they're leading, how will it affect the way that they treat people? The leader's arrogant, they're proud, they think I'm better than the people that I'm leading. How will it affect the way that they treat the people they're leading?
There'll be a superiority complex.
Okay, but what will that lead to? How will that mean?
Intimidating.
Sorry?
It's intimidating. There'll be no creativity or people putting forth fresh ideas because fear will be rife.
Okay.
A lack of approachability.
Lack of approachability. I love the point. Lack of approachability. Definitely intimidation. I'm better than you. If you don't do what I tell you, and Palak absolutely may be disrespectful. Who's seen that happen? Who has seen that happen? Okay. Okay. Now it's interesting. Right now there's a war for talent. So what's happening is people are less and less willing to put up with bad behavior like that. So the leader who thinks that they're better than other people, they can exploit people, push them around, because if I'm better than you, it's okay for me to exploit or mistreat you because after all, I'm superior, you're inferior. In fact, this is such a key point that we see in world wars, historical situations, people have been exploited en masse exactly from this mentality. The leader thought I'm better than these people, so it's okay for me to abuse them actually. Okay, let's look at the other side. What's the danger when the leader has low self-esteem? What can happen there? Yes, Gabrielle.
Yeah, of course, it's manipulation and controlling, because if you have no self-esteem, you have to use power or manipulation. And if you don't have the power, you fake the power by manipulation.
Yeah, absolutely. So a lot of imposter syndrome comes from this. I actually feel inferior and therefore I overreact. But what else? There's another danger. If the leader has low self-esteem, what could be another danger?
Insecure leaders.
Control. You are not allowed to. You are not letting any actions or moves from team at all.
Okay, you can be overly controlling. But what else? Insecurity. Avantika, I heard you say that. Tell me more.
Yes, you find very low performing teams led by leaders who have low self, because they're scared of bringing on people that they feel will be better than them or that they can't match up to. So usually you have either teams like Gabriel said, which have a lot of politics in there because they compensate for their lack of leadership confidence with getting unnecessary power gains into the system just to maintain top position. And they are insecure of high performing talent in their teams. So they deliberately kind of, set up creating mediocrity as the benchmark in their teams.
Absolutely. In fact, with a leader who's very insecure, they can often try to suppress other people. You see, they see someone's potential. Let me make sure that that potential never comes out. So rather than helping people to grow and flourish, what they do instead is anyone who doesn't agree with me, I feel so insecure that if you disagree with me, I'll just stab you in the back, or I'll just get rid of you, even though what you're sharing may actually be true. So I'm no longer interested in the truth. I'm just interested in being the best, or being the top, or being in control. Okay, now let's be honest. If you have really great high performers and the leader treats them that way, what will they do?
They'll walk.
Absolutely. Absolutely. They'll know immediately, I can't do my best work here. I can't perform here. This person feels threatened by me. Let me go elsewhere. Okay. And then to Palak's point, I'd love you to elaborate on this. They may not have the full confidence when providing direction and may confuse. Palak, tell me more, please.
So I was in a team once when it was, the direction we received was really tentative. It was like, oh, I guess you could do this, because they were not so sure of themselves and they weren't so sure of the direction they were giving us. And they were afraid to take accountability for the way the project played out, because it might, in the event that it went south, it would further weaken their perception within the team.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So there's also, it can also be a lack of responsibility, but also interestingly enough, if the leader does not have healthy self-esteem, the leader may end up being bullied or pushed around by the team. See, that's the other thing. So either of these dynamics is unhealthy and it's unbalanced. What we're looking for as leaders is to have a healthy self-esteem. I'm valuable and everyone in my team is valuable as well. I'm not above them, but I'm also not below them. Okay, now we're going to get into this in a bit more detail in the following way. Let me just show you this next slide, because I want to get to our activity soon. So there's some very powerful research, which is all around this idea of change and transformation, because these low self-esteem, excessive self-esteem, these are all patterns of behavior which are unhealthy. There's some research by a person named James Pennebaker, and he talked about journaling as a means of actually working through and processing some of the experiences that causes us to overreact and underreact. Okay, so we're talking here about the leader having triggers, the leader being overreactive, pushy, rude, disrespectful, the leader also being too weak, being pushed around, not having some firmness, some principle. And most important, and I've been really excited to share this with you, how we change this. I'm going to show you the research and then we're going to get to an activity on this. So in this research on journaling, James found that just by people writing about difficult experiences, they did studies and they found that by people expressing through writing some of their difficult experiences, mistakes, and so on, these were some of the benefits. They found that the immune system was strengthened, right? Look at this. This is very, very powerful. It helped people to clarify their thoughts and feelings. They were able to also decrease the symptoms of their asthma and rheumatoid arthritis. They were able to reduce stress. They were able to know themselves better, to solve problems more effectively, to resolve disagreements with other people, and also to develop and maintain relationships. And these were just some of the benefits. Now I'm going to switch this screen off. I'm going to ask you why. Why would people being able to write about difficult experiences, mistakes that they've made, weaknesses, why would it release such powerful, positive outcomes? Why? Yes, Gabrielle. And then I'll go to Hebrew after Gabrielle. Yes, you're muted, Gabrielle.
I think to write down is too necessary to reflect your own action and your own behavior, because we have to reflect what is our part in the situation. If we don't do that, we will never change the situation.
Absolutely. What they found was, and this is you can look this up online if you want more, I can send you some links as well, because this is very well-known research. What they found was by people writing about difficult times, they're able to literally work through those experiences and change. Now, I'll explain how this works. When we go through a difficult experience, especially as leaders, because leaders have difficult choices to make. When you go through difficult experiences as a leader and you don't navigate it successfully, a part of our unconscious mind becomes triggered. In other words, the unconscious mind now knows that this situation was a situation where we had some bad experience. It's a situation where we weren't able to have mastery. So the mind will always have this alert, uh-oh, danger, 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 because it's the subconscious mind will reflect that if you ever go into that experience again, you don't know how to deal with it. And that's what causes the overreaction or the underreaction, okay? So when you write about those experiences and you work through, you see, what role did I play in those difficulties? Why did that happen to me? What the mind wants to know is that if you went into that situation again, you wouldn't suffer in the same way that you did before. If you went into that situation again, you would be able to navigate it successfully. So when we write about those difficult experiences, when we write about what happened, I'll give you some questions in a moment. What happened? How did I end up in that situation? And when we start to see that I've got new strategies now, I'm a different person now. And if I was in that situation again, I would be able to handle it differently, effectively, successfully. When you do that, funnily enough, you will actually slow down your aging process. Let me explain what I mean by that. When people are able to go back to a previously difficult situation, but now with a greater sense of wisdom and effectiveness, your stress signal, it doesn't get triggered, because now that situation is no longer a threatening situation. Now that situation is actually a safe situation because you are equal to the challenge. Does that make sense, first of all? Yeah. So I'm often telling leaders and advising leaders, how are you also journaling? Journaling about previous challenges, previous difficulties, and what you learned from it, how you would do that differently now because you're a more evolved individual. And when they do this journaling, many of these benefits accrue, okay? So we talk about leaders having self-mastery, but what I wanted to share with you is the how. This is one potent technique. If you do this on a regular basis, it's a potent technique for literally transforming previously difficult situations and coming through to a sense of mastery. So the next time you're in that situation or circumstance, it's no longer strict, it's no longer triggering, it's no longer stressful, because you figured out why you didn't succeed before. You figured out how you're different now. You figured out how you would respond differently in the future when that situation comes again, and you can embody it. You see, as a leader, to the points that you all shared before, it's not enough to say, oh, I'll be better. You're not going to be better unless you've really learned the lessons of the previous challenges. Does that make sense? And if we can do this as leaders for ourselves, we can embody and teach that to everyone that we lead. This is what excites me so much. I see most leaders, they don't do this work, and they don't even know how to do it. They just say, yes, we made a mistake, or I get triggered because when I grew up, I found that my parents told me that my brothers were better than me, so I had this inferiority complex, and I don't know how to change. You see, they know what the problem is, they don't know how to practically work through to a solution. This is one of the most powerful techniques to work through to a solution. I'm going to go to Gabrielle for your comment, and I'm going to go to the activity. Gabrielle.
Yeah, I just want to comment because I do write every day, and what I find out, it's just a recommendation. I learned in the last years that because I had a lot of challenges to face, and I realized at the beginning, I was thinking, why do I have so many challenges, so incredible many challenges? But then I realized I had in my at the beginning of my lifetime, I had also really, really hard challenges to face. And when you're a child, of course, you will know it all stuck in your energy field, and you will never go back and look at this because it's all so much pain all over. So in the last years, at the beginning, I didn't know why I had to go through so incredible much emotional and physical and so much pain. I didn't know. But then I learned to know, oh my gosh, it all brings me back to all this stuck energy from my childhood, to face it again, to let it go. And when you look at challenges this way, that it just brings you back to a point where you already have a stuck energy, you do it in a total different way. You're more happy to have a challenge because you think, oh, now I can overcome these weaknesses. I can overcome this stuck, I would call this stock of love, because when we come alive, we have a flow of love. If you look at children pictures, every child is full of love. And then so many things happen to us. They threaten us. And then all this love or all this life force energy comes stuck. And only by facing it again, and as you said, writing down and looking at from all different perspectives, we can, and as you said, also this very, very most important compassion for the other people. Only then you can let it go. And I just want to mention it because it gives a total different perspective on challenges. Because usually we think, why me? Why I have to? But if you see it as an opportunity to let go what was stuck already, it's a total different thing. Yeah.
Thank you so much for sharing that. Now, one thing is, I'm just conscious, how long do we have? Because what we may do is we may do this activity in the next session if people have to go soon. So what's our timeline like, first of all?
I need to go now, but please feel free to carry on, and I've got the essence of, if you can tell me the activity, I could do it on my own as well. So that's always an option.
Okay, no problem. But I just want to see where is everyone else? Because it's something I want us to really get into, because I think it's going to really, it's done a lot for me, and I think it will do a lot for everyone. But how is everyone else for time? We could, let's see how much time does everyone else have? Okay, so Vivi,
I'm going to jump now as well.
Okay, so what we're going to do is, we've just set this up. In the next session, I want to get into this as a proper activity. What we're going to do is show you something that you can do in your own time to literally work through any weaknesses. And I do mean any weaknesses, right? Because people always hear about, they don't know what to do. And I'll say this before we end. When you think, when you write, and when you speak truthfully, they're all the same thing. So writing truthfully, speaking truthfully is the same as thinking truthfully. And it's a very powerful way of literally letting go of any knots in your character. So we're here talking about leaders having self-mastery, but most leaders don't know how to change. And they don't know what they can do towards that. This is one of the most powerful tools. And I'll tell you, I know Ricken will be aware of this, B.T. Swami, he used to write regularly and very, very honestly and openly. And I saw him many times, and I saw how that was one of the key activities that allowed him to change. In this research by James Pennebaker, he says that when you write about difficult past experiences, in the beginning, the first few weeks, you feel awkward. But in the long term, you get all of these key benefits. And you can literally let go of certain patterns of behavior that have been holding us back for maybe, in some cases, decades. It's that powerful. So we're going to get into this next week. We're going to do some specific activities around this, which are going to help us to really explore the power of this. Because as leaders, if we don't have that healthy self-esteem, if we're not balanced, if we're too weak or overbearing, we will not be able to be the example of leadership that our teams require. Okay, so we'll stop here. I know, Heba, was there a comment you wanted to make before we end?
No, it's fine. I just wanted to say about letting go when I write. When people write, it's like a load over us. So we're leaving it. And this is one. Two, for me, when we write, things are structured. I go back to what Gabrielle was saying. So sometimes you're overwhelmed, but when we write, things we see that are, more structured and are easiest by far. So we had a better solution because, it's not, it's exaggerated in our head, but when we write it, it's better because in our head, we continue of thinking of it. So it's become bigger, the problem become bigger.
Absolutely.
This is it.
Absolutely. So when we come into the session next week, we're going to do an exercise. I'm going to get you to write something, but we'll do it together. And then I'm going to get you to share something. Again, it'll be within what's comfortable for you. But we look forward to next week to get into this because I think you'll really find this transformative. Thank you very much for your time.